Hey everyone, welcome to the Incubator Podcast. I'm your co-host, Darren Boyd.
And this is Satbir Sran. Thank you for listening in today. We are really excited to have Zscaler, and not only just Zscaler, but its Chief Technology Evangelist, Brian Deitch, joining us today. Welcome, Brian.
What is up, best friends? Thanks for having me on the podcast.
All right. Well, thanks for making the time to join us here today. Now, I'm pretty sure that given that you guys have 30% of the Forbes Global 2000 customer base already under your belt, that most folks have heard of you. But for those that haven't, Zscaler connects people to resources, the workforce to workloads. And that's the way I'll sum it up. Brian, does that make sense in terms of how you would describe Zscaler? And please expand or make fun of me for getting it wrong.
No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. And it's only 30% of the Forbes Global 2000. I can't sleep till we get to 100%, right? So world domination, and I won't stop until we have a zero trust exchange on the moon, or maybe even Mars. So yes.
That's a good point. Like, why is it only 30 when you are fundamentally solving a major pain point out there in the marketplace, right? So we're here to unpack that today with you, Brian, is to how you have gotten to 30% and why the other 70% really needs to be thinking about Zscaler. We're hoping today we cover where the journey has been since 2007, and maybe in the last couple of years more rapidly so, and then getting into where or what Zscaler is becoming from a data protection, DLP, and overall all part of your zero trust exchange strategy. Does that sound good, Brian?
I love it. Sounds like a plan. Thank you very much.
All right.
All right, so why don't we start, Brian? If you could introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your background. You've been at Zscaler for about 7 years. You've done all the things. Why don't you tee up, who you are, and then we'll start to unpack. Maybe you can actually give us a very high-level view of the portfolio, and then we'll start to focus. We're not going to get through the whole thing. You guys do a lot of incredible stuff, so we're going to have you back. But if you can kick that off, we'll pick a couple areas and go a little bit deeper, and then we'll have you back on the show.
Yeah. Well, it's so many stories. I've been here for 7 years. A little bit of background on me. I actually came in as an SC and then kind of worked my way to the Chief Technology Evangelist position. You might be asking yourself, what the heck is that? So if I go all the way back to 2012, I was at an SKO event, a sales kickoff, and a gentleman by the name of Guy Kawasaki came in, and he was the former Chief Technology Evangelist for Apple Computer, and he gave a presentation that changed everything that day. And so that moment, I remember calling my wife saying, I want to be able to do that at some point in time. So that's always been my North Star over the years. And I think late last year or early last year, finally landed the position I was looking for. So, but yeah, that's how I got here. But what was that path as an SC, as an architect and whatnot? Man, I'll tell you what, got here pre-IPO and everything, the buzz was all like Zscaler Internet Access. How do you protect internet? How do you protect SaaS? And then there's this whole notion of private access, which is let's get away from doing VPNs because VPNs they're dumb and old, right? They can have child support and alimony at this point in time, and doing it a different way, right? And so it was kind of neat. So we were kind of a two-trick pony at that point in time. And I remember sitting in an all hands talking to Jay. I asked him a question. I said, "Hey, when are we going to do out of band CASB?" And he said, "Brian, we're not even selling both products that we already have right now. Why are we going to start doing a third one?" And I just kind of laughed. But over the course of time, once the adoption kind of picked up off of ZIA, which is the Zscaler Internet Access, and Zscaler Private Access, that's when we started doing other things like the out-of-band CASB, which just became a checkbox. Same thing with like browser isolation, and it all kind of stemmed probably 2 years into it, right around when SASE first came out, not the Magic Quadrant, but just the paperwork. And I remember flying from Phoenix to Las Vegas, and I said, oh my God, we paid Gartner to highlight our architecture. Like, I thought it was so fundamentally exactly us, with the exception of like a couple little fancy features, right? Like EDM, which we now support when it comes to data protection. Browser isolation was another one that we weren't doing, but we do now. And then I think the last one was around maybe some SD-WAN or maybe some deception-based technology that were in there. But now, of course, we do the whole gamut.
Yeah, what I love about that is you have been doing this a long time. If I look at, like, you have 150 plus pops globally, an incredible number of transactions go through that ecosystem per day. I think it's 400 billion plus. So you've owned that space and you've done that very well. And now I'm seeing like a whole series of integrations which get you closer into the developer experience. It brings you closer to some of the cloud implementations and closer to new use cases such as GenAI, which we'll unpack here in a little bit. So
Yeah.
I love the foundation you've built. And if time permits, I do want to get a little bit into that zero trust exchange, because I think that's a fundamental concept that you just keep innovating on top of. But hopefully today, we have a lot of customers that are really concerned with the explosion of data. I think everybody is, where that data resides. And now we've got new use cases on how to consume it. And this is causing a unique challenge. Now, you have been addressing this space for some period. And I want to talk about all of the innovations you've been doing in this space, because it is significant. Everything from expanded auto discovery, which is going to be important. I have to find this data. I have to be able to classify it, et cetera, all the way through to not only DSPM, but integrating it with your policy engines, applying DLP everywhere. You're doing an incredible amount of the space. So if you could, maybe if you can help tee up, how do you look at data protection as Zscaler? And then maybe we just pick apart some of the uniqueness that I think you bring to the market, like having such a mature DLP engine pre-pinning or underpinning all of this capability as an example. But could you start teeing up data protection, and what's been happening in that space in your eyes?
I'll tell you what, like when we first started doing this, right? I think, and by we, I meant everyone in the industry. Hey, how are we gonna do cloud DLP? And it was wrong, right? It was just like, well, how do we do it back in the day? Well, we use like regex and dictionaries, right? It's terrible, right? It's the, if anything, it's gonna be tons of false positives and just an unfriendly way of doing things. And so it's kind of evolved over time. And the way that we look at this is we said, in order for us to be a great partner for our customers, is that we have to make life a little bit easier. And so we're looking at one unified DLP policy to manage for all the traffic going inline. So if it's going out the internet, private stuff, blah, blah, blah. Same thing from out of band, being able to reach in via APIs and apply the same data protection across all avenues. And then last but not least is like data in use, which is at the endpoint. Doing it all through those three buckets makes life exponentially easier for DLP admins. But again, when we look at that, there's really two problems. One, it's like, how do you do the classification? And then two, where's your data, right? And that this is two fundamental things that I look at that I think that we do a little bit differently. So the first one would be, where is your data? And sometimes they choose to partner. Maybe they've started with Microsoft, maybe they've done some classification efforts there. Maybe they've done the same thing with Rubrik. And my idea here is I'm going to take all that heavy lifting, because chances are it took them months to even get that done and vaguely familiar, and to put it in line in Zero Trust Exchange for enforcement. Because if I sit at kind of that front door into everything, then I see all things. And decryption is really, really big. And so I always kind of focus on that, because anything going out to internet SaaS, that's going to be between 90 to 95% encrypted. So if you're not decrypting that stuff and inspecting it, then what are you really doing? You're applying DLP to 5% of your traffic. That's insane. There's got to be a better way of doing it. The other one as well. Now you can get into the whole fundamentals of like, well, what if we did it with index document matching or exact data match? So looking at unstructured data versus structured data. Again, the pain point there is, where's your data, right? And so your best effort is you start right here and you kind of grow that out. But what I have seen take off in the last 18 months is something called a data discovery report, which is we sit in line anyways, and using Gen AI or machine learning, using AI and ML, right? We have the ability to kind of know your data better than you know your data. And what that really means is that if I have any user at any location or workload that's going out to internet, SaaS, private cloud, things like that, I break it. I don't break it. I inspect it without interruption to the user or the workload. And then I can help with the classification of that data. And what you see is you're like, hey, did you know they had sales professionals that are taking POs and putting it into their own personal email? Did you know you have people in HR that are sharing stuff out to Box.net, but your corporate standard is Office 365 or OneDrive, right? and then using that as a catalyst to innovate some, or to using that as a catalyst to induct some change. And we don't want to be like Thor's hammer, right? We want to come through and be elegant with it. So there's a couple different things, right? That same user is now taking something out to box.net. They shouldn't be doing that. I can warn them, or I can caution them, I can coach them through that. But hey, listen, I can let you get there right now. You can't take anything that's sensitive and put it there. But what I want you to do is I want you to take all that stuff you put over there initially and bring it back and put it into OneDrive. And you have 30 days to do so. And the same thing, like if I have never seen something before and I have a user that's plugging away and maybe it's PCI or PII data, it's never been labeled or classified. As it's flowing to the Zero Trust Exchange, I could dynamically put the label on there, right? Or the data protection. And if that user, and even if I've never seen it before, or even like a Microsoft has never seen it before, be able to intelligently see that and maybe stop that user from taking that traffic up to their own personal email and saying, oh, whoa, whoa, hold down, Haas. This belongs over here, and do that with the kind of a more or less sexy end user notification. And then there's the whole like workflow automation side, which is the DLP admins. What does their life look like? Can we make it easier? Can we find that needle in the haystack and produce better business outcomes? And ultimately, what we're trying to do right here is to introduce the security, right? The data protection, but not break the business. Because the moment you do that, that's when you start getting those people that are out there trying to figure out, how do I get around it? Maybe I'll spin up an SSH channel to the private cloud, and then from the private cloud, I'll try to egress out of there and do all kinds of evasion techniques. We don't want to do that. We want to be a partner and make their life better.
Yeah. Just to double click on that, Brian, or go back,
Yeah.
you talked about the DLP or just data protection admins, right? And we don't want to
Yeah.
break the business. But fundamentally what you described, I think that's historically broken the business, is the classification aspect, where people really just fail to start or launch a data protection DLP program because they don't seem to get the classification part right, or that seems like a daunting effort. So now Zscaler is sitting in line. You see the data, you're able to decrypt it, understand the data, and feed that kind of governance and classification logic back. Do I have that right?
You do. And the way that we're doing this isn't with like a regex or dictionary. What we did is we set up like, so going back to your, I think Darren, you said it earlier, we have 150 points of presence, 40 to 50 million users on our cloud at any given point in time, millions of workloads.
Mm-hmm.
We use that to kind of feed our engine to learn about DLP. So I'm not doing like crude things. I'm actually looking at this and saying, hey, this is indeed data that I've never seen before. But based off the patterns that I'm seeing, and not like a regex pattern, but based off the patterns, this is sales or marketing or HR or financial stuff, and be able to produce those classification labels. That way we can enforce it.
Yeah.
I do want to believe that I think that's a great like first step into data protection. I do think that once you've done that, the next viable thing would be, well, maybe we start looking at structured data and unstructured data as well, just to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's.
Yeah.
I always think it's a journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wanted to, double click into that because I felt that was a, failure to launch or a start aspect. It was a daunting task, and Zscaler's made it much easier to consume. Otherwise, those admins or resources were historically spending time trying to figure out how to classify. And with the power of AI and ML, as you stated, now you've overcome that initial part of this. Now it's like taking the ball forward.
On that false start, right? And sometimes it's kind of a delayed start. So let's go all the way back to someone bought Microsoft and they have an E5 or an M5 license, and of course they get free data protection. And so they go out there, and you might be familiar with it as Purview or Microsoft Information Protection or Azure Information Protection, and they go through that classification effort. And let's say it takes, I don't know, a year to do it, and then they've produced between 3 to maybe 7 labels total, and like, man, this is great for Microsoft stuff. And then if there's an API, then I can kind of enforce it. But if I want to get more value out of it, I have to do it inline. And then my options become, well, do I want to do that in Windows Defender? Well, maybe we're a CrowdStrike shop, right? And you're like, well, we don't want to have to run 2 things on there. This doesn't make sense. But we are a Zscaler shop. How much effort would it be to take those labels that you've created in Microsoft and enforce that across the entire internet and SaaS-based platform? It's like 5 minutes. That's if you spend 2 minutes to talk about your feelings, right? Be able to do that in line and have a great time. So I always, when I sit down and talk with customers, like, what have you guys done so far? And if there's some low hanging fruit that is this high value, then let's get it going. So I'm sorry to cut you off there.
No,
what were
no,
you
that
gonna
was
say?
perfect because I was going to restate what you said earlier, which is Zscaler wants to partner, right? You are opinionated. You've done this work. You've got 400 billion plus transactions coming. You're learning from it. But you give, I've seen it across all your products. You give a prescriptive way of doing this. You lower the barrier to actually start. And then you allow the customer to tweak the way they need to. We've seen it across a number of things. And so I think from a true partnership perspective, because then you go to DLP. DLP, you see some very crude actions in the market,
Yeah.
right? But your DLP is a lot more sensitive. We can do a lot more granular choice along the way. And so even that, and by the way, DSPM without DLP, I mean, I don't know what you're really going to do with it.
Yeah.
So to have a sophisticated engine that's been around since day one and build DSPM on top of that, I think makes all the difference, like all the difference. And so I think that, I mean, you talked about it with your I'm going to butcher that. Your developer, your experience layer. Like you spend a lot of time. What was that called again? I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah. So it's DEM is what
Digital.
we call it in the digital experience monitoring. We call it Zscaler digital experience. But yeah, the
Yeah.
end user monitoring, being able to produce outcomes, right? Like real quick, just to explain that, I have a user going out to Office 365. Maybe it's Teams, and it sucks. How long does that take to troubleshoot today, right? Is it a couple hours? Is that a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? Does it sometimes just fix itself? With Zscaler, the integration is kind of built into the platform. You can just say, hey, analyze this connection for Darren. It could be anything. It could be his CPU. It could be local Wi-Fi, ISP, maybe something in Zscaler Cloud, maybe the last mile, right? Complete visibility, and take it from that month down to just a couple of minutes. And I don't want network on the phone. I don't want security on the phone. I want a tier one help desk person that can produce that outcome of like, hey, dude, did you know that Adobe Updater.exe is killing your computer? That's why, number one, you can probably fry an egg on it. And then two, that's why it's probably killing your team's experience. They're like, oh, okay, I do that, go back to my job, I'm happy.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it. Your focus on the experience, right? And I was just going to tie that together with your DLP emphasis. Everything you do is focused on that experience, and I think that really matters. But you're also expanding the notion across so many other areas. So we've seen advances in DLP. You continue to go down that path. We've seen everything integrated in your Zero Trust platform, your exchange, and that's a phenomenal one touch experience. But then we've seen incredible use case expansions. We saw it with when you purchased Canonic for some of the SaaS SSPM enhancements. That plays into a DSPM strategy. We've seen it with your GenAI security. Can you walk us through? Because now we're talking. So we've covered that you can go and find the data. You add the context, which is so important. Now you can do some really sophisticated protections, and that'll be your DLP engine. But now you've got these expanded use cases. I don't know which one we should start with, but either SaaS, which is explosive. We've seen the data exchanges that are happening in SaaS. And that is a real ugly beast because anybody with a credit card can start and we can get out of control very quickly. Yeah. And then GenAI is the other one that you are among, I'm going to suggest, very few that have stopped the initial reaction of let's just block everything. But going into input inspection and looking at the data exchanges, that's fascinating unto itself. Where would be a good place, Brian, to go next then with this concept?
Yeah, so I would say that the SaaS-based stuff, maybe it's like a little bit of a broken record. I think people get that, right? If anything, from a SaaS-based perspective, you might think you have 40 applications. You probably have 700. I'm here to tell you about them. But yeah, the Gen AI stuff is I think paramount right now. And when I look at it through this lens, is that it can do a lot. I also would say that ChatGPT 4.0, it's pretty cool, right? But Chat 3, when there was no guardrails, was a lot more fun. But I digress. I'll leave it at that. But when I first saw it, I was like, man, this is going to change the world. But you're right, the input validation. I think everyone first gut reaction was to block it, right? And so the next one would be if you didn't have any data protection strategy, what's the way that you can enable the business to still use it, but have peace of mind knowing that your stuff's not going everywhere? And that's where you get into browser isolation, which is I don't have to specify ChatGPT, right? I can just say any Gen AI that's out there, go ahead and put the user into browser isolation. When I do that, they can use the app, but their ability to maybe copy sensitive information and paste it into that application completely revoked. So maybe think of source code, things like that. So maybe they'll just use it to maybe ghostwrite an email. I have no idea. But if you want to give them a full natural experience, and guess what? You've already been doing, data protection with Zscaler. ChatGPT or any of these apps, it's just a destination to me. It might as well just be briandeitch.com, right? It could be anything. I'm going to inspect that traffic all the time. And if I'm going to go up there and paste something that's, has some type of negative connotation to the business, whether it was a financial statement, maybe you were planning on doing like a merger and acquisition and you're doing some stuff like that. We don't want to train that engine that's out there for everyone, right? To be able to do different things, or even source code and things like that. PCI, HIPAA, any of that data, stop it from going up, enable the business to do a lot more. And really, when we talk about that user experience, users really kind of fall down into two separate buckets for me. There's the users that are using Gen AI, but there's the users, the administrators of our platform. And I don't want to make it super difficult to them to do things. If anything, when let's take like a very large 100,000 user population, if you were able to sit down with them and be like, hey, show me everything you've ever done in Zscaler. Okay, well, show me all your rules that you do for this URL filtering. You're like, wow, you guys have 5? Yeah, that's all we got to do, right? Zscaler, zero trust. They look at everything. So even though briandeitch.com is a science blog, doesn't matter what's on there. It's always going to inspect it, whether it's checking for sandboxing, whether it's checking to see if there's sensitive information over there. Let's say that maybe tomorrow I change it from a blog to Gen AI. It's still Gen AI. I'm still going to do different things with it. If you go into DLP, you'd be like, yeah, we have semantic or whatever else, the old school stuff out there, and we had 120 rules. And in Zscaler, like, oh, we just have 10, right? Like it's a paramount shift, and those 10 work for inline, out of band, and at the endpoint, right? And then we look at that and say, wow, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be able to manage a data protection platform. And I can do the same things with Sandbox. Probably just going to have 3 of those. Advanced Cloud Firewall, maybe just a dozen. They'll just blast across everywhere, right? Why make your life difficult if we can do things a little bit more simple?
Yeah, and I think I saw your report from your threat team quoted. I think like 10 months previous to Jan 2024, there was a 600% increase in enterprise use of AI and ML in terms of use cases. And so being able to integrate the input validation, and as sophisticated as you want that to be, with a DLP function, again, like that is an enabler. If I can have the two, then I can really proceed, which is a fantastic implementation. And you said something else, which is this is very easy to consume. It's very easy to deploy. Can you talk a little bit about maybe that? So maybe now we're in the zero trust exchange experience. Mm-hmm. I've implemented this. What does that implementation look like? How easy is it for us to get to some of these rich data protection scenarios? What does that look like ish?
So I just broke, the Brian Deitch rule, number 1, which is never tell people that it's simple when historically it's been very difficult to get done, right? And so, and I've already said it's been simple a couple of times throughout this podcast. So let me kind of qualify that. So when you think of Zscaler, the Zero Trust Exchange, what is that? That's just like where I do all my enforcement up there in the cloud, which is just somebody else's data center. The 3 hardest things to do are this. 1, how do you get the traffic to Zscaler? Well, for users or any endpoint that can support it, we have an agent, right? That gets installed right there. And then 2, you have to be able to decrypt that traffic. Well, guess what? When I send the user's device, I install my little Zscaler agent on there. I bundle in the SSL certificate so I can do the inspection. And then 3, I got to identify who the user is, and I want to make your life easier, right? So maybe you're using Ping or Azure Active Directory, which is now Entra ID. I think they have an identity crisis over there. Just kidding. Or maybe it's even Okta, right? Federate, we use SAML, Skim, pick up all the latest and greatest. And then what happens if you look at it through this lens? If the traffic's coming through there, and for workload stuff, we have a variety of things. We have Cloud Connector for the cloud. We have Branch Connector for your branches. We have GRE tunnels for your data center. But if I can get that traffic there, then everything else just becomes a checkbox because all of the hard things that you have to do historically, patches, maintenance, upgrades, scalability, trying to figure out that service mesh of which one comes in here and then layer it. And then if something fails, like what do I do? That's all on us. The ADS is on us, right? That's the cloud operations. They do all the hard, sexy stuff in order for you just to come through there and just be like, hey, I want to create a policy. And if I contextually know every single user, but more importantly, their groups, their locations, the departments they're a part of, then I can tie that into like your little DLP engine that says, hey, this is sensitive stuff. It doesn't go here, or it does, right? So you kind of start with, the applications that you know, and then you just kind of waterfall it down and then block things that it shouldn't be going to. But again, being an enabler of the business, having a conversation, and you don't have to block, right? We're going to do allow, we can block. If we do allow, we can still kind of notify. I can even isolate them, or warn them, coach them through these things to tell them to do better things. And I think the coaching portion is really paramount because if I have a user, and let's say that you're sitting on your laptop, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, I have no idea, and you're trying to take something sensitive, I can block you, but I can do a little end user notification that says, hey, dummy, it doesn't go there. By the way, I would never call my people a dummy, but you see where I'm going with this.
Sabir abuses me with that term all the time.
Well, for us simpler minds, Brian, I'm going to try to take this concept of the zero trust exchange and simplify it again for my simple mind. So the zero trust exchange is really the glue that I can look at it for all the products that we've talked about, all the capabilities we've talked about within Zscaler's offerings. So everything that we or I route from my enterprise, from my organization effectively, goes up there. It's secure fashion, decrypted up there. That's where I can apply all of these various policies and in points of enforcement. So from that point, if the data is also there, I take it that's where the AI ML learning happens uniquely to my organization, right? Now, quite often folks would probably say, hey, what else is Zscaler doing with my data? Because it's someone else's data center, right? How do I ensure that is also secure unto my organization's data? Just putting it out there.
Yeah. So if you think about Zscaler, we are a multi-tenant platform, right? And so it would be, if I have, I don't know, 7,000 customers, trying to push that policy across 150 different data centers where it all lives there for 40 to 50 million users, like it doesn't scale at all. And so from a multi-tenant perspective, what we do is that enforcement, the zero trust exchange, it's the enforcement, like it's the bronze in the brain. What happens is as traffic comes in to your organization, it's married to your identity, right? Like I can't do anything. I can't break it. And more in particular, I'm not going to get confused between Acme versus a different company, right? And it's tied to your identity. And when it comes in, I pull that down. And that once I do that and I start to look at that policy, I marry to your user and to your traffic and just your traffic alone, right? It gives me that complete visibility. That way I'm not like taking someone else's policy and enforcing it against something else. Like I always definitively know where the traffic is coming from. And on that note, there's something I would love to say. Well, actually, there's two things. One, your data, right? If I ever go down the route of doing like index document matching or exact data match, that's a fingerprint of your data, right? That is now living in the Zscaler cloud. How do we have peace of mind knowing that I can't see it, right? We're going to hide it from even Zscaler. And so what we do is when that happens, we use like an indexing tool that will solve and hash it and then roll that hash up to the Zscaler cloud. And it can only be unlocked with an identity from your organization. So I can go through there all day long. It's this gobbledygook, right? But it can only be enforced your data if it's a user coming through with their, with their authentication domain and being married to that. And on that last note that I'll give you guys is that when it comes to doing stuff with Zscaler, and I drew a hard line in the sand, maybe I think 18 months into my gig here, which is I'm not going to design a unicorn anymore, right? I don't work at F5 Networks. I don't need to do that. I'm going to stick to cows in the pasture. And if I do that, then what I have something that becomes operationally sound. And I can't tell you how many times I walked away from a customer and I'm saying, hey, listen, like you guys want to do wackadoo stuff? I don't do wackadoo stuff, right? I want to set you guys up for success. I want this to be a platform that if you have any churn internally and they go somewhere else, somebody else can come right in, pick it up. It's going to work. I want to make sure that when you call in Cisco because you did a jury tunnel with Zscaler, that it's supported, it's done in the right way. If you have a CrowdStrike thing or Microsoft, right? Or even Okta, like it's going to come through and be like, oh yeah, this is a turnkey solution. You're not doing anything weird at all. And what that really happens is your users are happy because it works, and your administrators are happy because they're not spending time troubleshooting some weirdness.
Yeah. No, so I'll help you violate your own rule. It's Zscaler has simplified this whole domain and truly has in terms of operational complexity, implementation complexity, and certainly the capability set.
Thank you for that.
Now, one last topic. I know we've been going here, but you guys have so much to unpack. Avalor. So a recent acquisition addresses the unified vulnerability management space. Could you share a little bit more about how Avalor is now being rolled into the overall capability set of Zscaler?
Yes. So immediately, right, it will always be kind of a standalone platform. But one of the reasons why we bought it is because it's a data fabric that can really kind of pull, number one, it can normalize the data that's ingested, right? And then pick out the needle in the haystack and then allow you to do something with it. So there's really twofold on the immediate use case. I was sitting down talking with a CISO the other day, and he's like, I have 250 externally facing CVEs, but the reality is only 5% may actually ever be exploited. I need a tool that's going to tell me out of those 250, which of the 5% I should probably prioritize and worry about the most. That's where Avalor comes in. The next one would be, well, obviously going to take this information that what Avalor does, and that's going to be kind of baked into other products that we have. So we have something called business insights. And if that would give you an idea, it would be, let's say you have 1,700 remote offices and you hybrid, you have people all around the world. How do you know what users are actually coming in to the office or they're just working from home? Do you need to stand up new offices, a bigger office? Do you have like a large insurance company that had room for 30,000 people and only 10 people showed up per week? Maybe they close that office and allow people to work from anywhere, right? There's some value in closing that office. You can sell that off and it's no longer a problem for you. And then also looking into Risk 360, which is it's a product that works primarily in the back end. And it just looks at like lateral propagation, data, your external attack surface, and other CVEs that are out there in the environment. It gives you a score. You use Avalor to enhance that to give a better holistic view outside of the Zscaler swim lane, right? Kind of a broader view entirely. But one of my favorite stories about Avalor recently came at RSA. And we met with a customer and they were giving us some information some coaching opportunity, right? They were not a Zscaler shop yet, but they were very excited about the Avalor acquisition. And so they were saying, hey, listen, we want to do this Avalor thing, but we understand that, you can do other things. This is how you would go around that old firewall company, this other thing, right? We'll call it data protection. It's like, okay, great. And then I said, well, let's talk a little bit about Avalor. And then he just stops. And he, for the next 30 minutes, is telling me why Avalor is so amazing and why we should sell to him. Now, I've been here 7 years across multiple acquisitions. I've never sat in a meeting where the customer said, no, we need this and we need it now. Like it was eye-opening. And he was 100% focused on CVE vulnerability management, right? That was his bread and butter and trying to figure out how to prioritize these things. And it wasn't the same CISO, it was a different person. But just to hear the genuine excitement around that, and he was talking about all the different data sources that he's able to pull in and do stuff, like it felt like it was such a powerful platform that he had never seen before.
I think, Brian, we're going to have to bring you and Zscaler back for a whole nother show, all on UVM and Avalor, because it is a domain, a topic that I think organizations have struggled out there for a long time, and there's been various approaches. None have seemed to resonate, but so we are very curious to unpack Avalor and hopefully take that to market in a bigger way, adding to the overall Zscaler portfolio of value and making it simple. So with that, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're looking forward to having you on again.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Brian. We'll have you back.
You guys are welcome to have me on the show anytime. We can talk about anything. We can even talk about cars next time. Who knows?
So, I can't, but I just want to get on your cool neon board. I think that
Yeah,
looks
you know
cool.
what, we'll have to do something together and record it, get it out there on the head site. So yeah, thank you guys for being great partners of Zscaler. I'm very excited to be working with you guys. I even had a couple guys that had worked for VCore back in the day, and then you guys had done the acquisition. So very familiar with the head. You guys do great things, and I appreciate the partnership.
No, we thank you as well.
Yeah.
All right, thanks,
you.
Brian.